So I'm going to go over the play by William Shakespeare called Julius Caesar. And it's going to be talking about the end part of Caesar's life. And we know that Julius Caesar gets assassinated by the Senate. But basically, the whole play focuses on another character named Brutus and his part in the assassination. Even though he was standing for righteousness, he was a stoic personality, and really believed in the law and such. He believed in the Senate and the political stand of the Senate over having a one ruler monarch or a one ruler dictator. And so even though he was good friends with Julius Caesar, he was part of the assassination. That's what the play actually is about. But as you go through the play, there are other themes that travel through that play too, such things as the Ides of March and was this fate? Did Caesar have other problems? Did Julius Caesar have other problems? Was Julius Caesar good or bad? And onto the Senate. Was the Senate good or bad? Was Brutus, and was he influenced by Cassius and the other members of the Senate falsely? Did he take in what they said about Caesar, that things that weren't true? So what all happened then? This is a historic event, yet Shakespeare puts it together in such a way, in such a play, that you're wondering, that you have a lot of thoughts, even about political things today. It goes out through history. Does the way that they do things justify the means? The end justify the means, which means you can use anything you want to get your ideology, in belief to work, and that happens in a lot of different political schemes, especially communism. So we see this whole thing coming to light, and it makes us think of a lot of different things, and it makes us feel sad for Brutus, and it makes us feel sad for Julius Caesar, of course. And it makes us also feel sad for both of their wives who are caught in this whole mess here. Julius Caesar's wife having a dream, and all of the forbearings that happened, warning him not to go that day, but that he was assassinated. And we also have Brutus's wife the same way. And so you have a whole scheme of events ending up in a great tragedy, and ending up in the historical perspective of, yes, they ended up with Caesar Octavius, Augustus Caesar, which was Julius Caesar's nephew, taking over, as a despot, as a leader, but not only a leader, a dictator. So what they thought that they were doing away with, they got even worse. But let's go in. I'm going to go through this just kind of stage by stage as you read the book, so you know what's going on. I know it's in the Old English language, so it's sometimes hard to understand, but it's good to read that, because then we can realize how William Shakespeare brought forth these tragedies in these theatrical plays that he wrote. So the play starts out with two tribunes, Flavius and Marlius, and they find scores of Roman citizens wandering the street, neglecting their work in order to watch Julius Caesar's triumphant parade. Caesar has defeated the sons of the deceased Roman general Pompey. He was at war. It was a civil war going on. And this Pompey was his arch rival in battle. The tribune scolded the citizens for abandoning their duties and removed decorations from Caesar's statues. Caesar enters with his entourage, including the military and the political figures of Brutus, Cassius, and Antony. So a soothsayer calls out in the midst. A soothsayer, a fortune teller, calls out in the midst for Caesar to beware of the Ides of March. Pretty spooky, huh? But Caesar ignores him and proceeds with the victory celebration. So the first stage, we have a celebration going on for the victory of Julius Caesar, although some people, especially Senate now, they disapprove of this victory, as Pompey actually represented the Senate. So we have a definite civil war. And you have the political figures of Brutus, Cassius being part of the Senate, and also an unusual character of Antony, Mark Antony, who indeed is Julius Caesar's right-hand man. So that's how it starts. It's like craziness. Like, where do these people believe? Who believes what? Some of them are moving the tributes to the Caesar, statues of Caesars. Some want to get rid of Caesar, and some believe he's a hero. So it's a very turmoiled situation as the play opens. And then the next scene, Cassius and Brutus, two of the Senate members of the Senate there, they're longtime intimate friends of Caesar and friends of each other, and they're conversing. Cassius tells Brutus that he has seemed very distant lately, and Brutus replies that he has been at war with himself. So Brutus now is like, the civil war is happening on the outside, but the civil war is happening on the inside of him. For he indeed is a friend of Julius Caesar, but now will he have to go against him and become his enemy? That's the war. Cassius states that he wishes Brutus could see himself as others see him, for then Brutus would realize how honored and respected he is. Brutus says that he fears that the people want Caesar to become king, which would overturn the republic. So he doesn't want, he says, you know, now we cannot have Caesar as king because we will not have a republic. And so Brutus is like in turmoil. And so Cassius is very conniving and tries to win Brutus completely to the side to get rid of Julius Caesar. So Cassius concurs that Caesar is treated like a god, though he is merely a man, no better than Brutus or Cassius. Cassius recalls incidents of Caesar's physical weakness and marvels that this fallible man has become so powerful. He blames his and Brutus' lack of will for allowing Caesar's rise to power. Sure, the rise of such a man cannot be the work of fate. Brutus considers Cassius' words as Caesar returns. Upon seeing Cassius, Caesar tells Antony that he's deeply distressed Cassius. So we have right in the midst, we have Cassius coming, and then Brutus, he's thinking that what is Cassius doing? Cassius is trying to turn Brutus totally against Julius Caesar, and in doing this, saying that basically they need to overthrow him because they need to bring in through the republic. Cassius is very conniving, trying to influence Brutus. So Julius Caesar departs, and another politician, Casca, tells Brutus and Cassius that during the celebration, Antony offered the crown to Caesar 3 times, and the people cheered, but Caesar refused it each time. He reports that Caesar then fell to the ground and had some kind of seizure before the crowd. His demonstration of weakness, however, did not alter the plebeians' devotion to him. Brutus goes home to consider Cassius' words regarding Caesar's poor qualifications to rule, while Cassius hatches a plot to draw Brutus into a conspiracy against Caesar. So what happens? Yes. So here we have another part of the Senate. Casca comes, and he says that he has watched what Caesar was doing, and that Mark Antony offers the crown to him 3 times, and Caesar refuses the crown, basically not saying that he does not want to be a monarch. He does not want to be the king. And so in doing all this, then what happens? Julius Caesar falls down and has some kind of seizure. So something was wrong with him. So now we get the strengths and the weaknesses of Julius Caesar. The people love him, especially the poor people, that love Julius Caesar. But now thinking, does he have a sign of weakness? Does he have a disease? Which we do know later on that Julius Caesar did have epilepsy. And so anyway, so it ends with that, and Brutus is thinking, well, and the part that Cassius says, people think he's a god. So Cassius is jealous. He's jealous that now that Julius Caesar is no different than he is, or that Brutus is. He says he's no different than us, and yet people think he's a god. So there's some kind of jealousy going on right there. So that night Rome is plagued with a violent weather in the midst of all this, and a variety of bad omens. And Brutus finds letters in his house, apparently written by Roman citizens. They were false letters by Cassius, but they were sent. He was worried that Caesar had become too powerful. The letters have in fact been forged and planted by Cassius, who knows that if Brutus believes it, the people's will, he will support a plot to remove Caesar from power. So he's looking at these letters and thinking, the people, oh my goodness, the citizens are worried and the citizens aren't supporting him. The letters were all forged and not real. And so Brutus fears the possibility of a dictator led empire overthrowing the Senate, and the Senate being left done away with. And so Brutus is, he's a Roman and he's a Republican, and he doesn't want to be ruled by one dictator or have the people ruled by one dictator. And now thinking, oh no, Julius Caesar wants to be the dictator of Rome. So then the Cassius arrives at Brutus' home with his conspirators, and Brutus, who has already been won over by letters, takes control of the meeting. The men agree to lure Caesar from his house and kill him. Cassius wants to kill Antony too, for Antony will surely try to hinder their plans. But Brutus disagrees, believing that too many deaths will render their plot too bloody and dishonor them. Having agreed to spare Antony, the conspirators depart. Portia, Brutus's wife, observes that Brutus appears preoccupied. She pleads with him to confide in her, but he does not. So in the midst of all this, we have this turmoil with Brutus again. And we have Brutus thinking, now we need to kill him. Not that he wants to, but for the Republic, for his political stand. And now has ultimate turmoil in the midst. And meeting with them, they have agreed to do this, to go to his house and to kill him. And so how would they do this? So that's what they're planning. And then someone says, well, we need to kill Antony too. Mark Antony was Julius Caesar's right-hand man, a general. And so they thought, and then Brutus like, no, that's too bloody. We don't need to kill Antony. Just, and to convince them not to kill Mark Antony. So we have this conspiracy going on. So Caesar prepares to go to the Senate, and his wife, whose name is Calpurnia, she begs him not to go, describing her recent nightmares that she's had, in which the statue of Caesar streamed with blood and smiling men bathed their hands in his blood. What a terrible nightmare. And Caesar refuses to yield to fear and says, oh yeah, right, that's just a dream. And he insists on going about his daily business. Finally, Calpurnia, his wife, convinces him to stay home, if not out of caution, then as a favor to her. But Decius, one other figure, comes in, and he's one of the conspirators, and he arrives and convinces Caesar that Calpurnia has misinterpreted her dreams and her recent omens, and Caesar departs for the Senate. So Caesar goes. So Decius comes and convinces Caesar to go, putting Calpurnia down. Calpurnia saying, oh, I'm having dreams, there's something bad gonna happen, and the storms are happening and all this. She said, just don't go for me, stay home. Julius, stay home. But he didn't. As Caesar proceeds through the streets toward the Senate, The soothsayer again tries but fails to get his attention. The citizen Artemideros hands him a letter warning him. Now he gets a warning letter about conspirators. So he's saying, there's a letter. Somebody knows what's going to happen, gives him the letter. But Caesar refuses to read it even. And he thinks basically the Senate are his friends and good guys. So going on from there, Caesar, basically at the Senate, the conspirators speak to Caesar and they bow at his feet and they encircle him. And they say, hey, hail Caesar, hey, Caesar. And these guys all come around, this whole Senate come around him like they're shaking his hand, all happy for him. And one by one, they stab him with their knives. Each one had a knife hidden and they stab Caesar. And then the last to stab Caesar, of course, is going to be Brutus. And Caesar sees his dear friend, Brutus, among the murderers. And then he gives up and dies. And before he dies, he says, Et tu, Brute, which means, and even you, Brutus. So he dies there. And of course, Brutus is like sickening as they do bathe their hands in the blood. And they do have taken on the blood of Julius, the great Julius Caesar. So now what's going to happen? Do they think that they're going to gain the support of the people now? Or what? How are they going to do this? How is this? What's the Senate plan? Is the civil war going to go on only worse? We know that happens. So the murderers bathed their hands and swords in Caesar's blood, thus bringing Calpurnia's premonition to fruition. Calpurnia's dream was correct. Mark Antony, having been led away on a false pretense, returns, and then he pledges against allegiance to the conspirators, especially Brutus. And Mark Antony weeps over Julius Caesar's body and can't believe what has happened. So he goes in to meet the Senate, these guys that did it, and he comes in, and at first he just shakes their hands, and marks them all. Every hand that he shakes, he realizes that senator needs to be put to death for killing Julius Caesar. So Mark Antony comes in and shakes their hand and marking them as guilty with a gesture of consolation. So when Antony asks why they killed Caesar, Brutus replies that he will explain their purpose in the funeral oration. That Brutus is going to speak at his funeral and explain why they killed Caesar. Antony asks to be allowed to speak over the body as well, but Brutus decides, at first they all decide, no way, we're not going to let Mark Antony speak. But then again, Antony is conniving now, like he wants to speak, and he's going to speak and tell what really happened. But he's really nice to them and everything. So basically Brutus grants his permission to speak at the funeral too. Mark Antony, Julius Caesar's right-hand man, and he is going to try to turn the tide of the public against the Senate. So Brutus grants permission for him to speak, and Cassius remains very suspicious then. Cassius is looking like, I don't know if we want Mark Antony to speak. He's not really part of the Senate. And then the conspirators depart, and Antony alone now swears that Caesar's death shall be avenged. So that scene ends with Antony saying, yes, and that speech is very dynamic, and basically saying, yes, Julius Caesar will be avenged. So Brutus and Cassius go to the forum to speak to the public, and Cassius exits to address another part of the crowd. Brutus declares to the masses that though he loved Caesar, he loves Rome more. So Brutus gets up in front of the people and says he loves Caesar, but he loves Rome more, and that Caesar's ambition posed a great danger to Roman freedom, Roman liberty. The speech placates the crowd. They calm down, and then Mark Antony, appears with Caesar's body. Can you believe that? And Brutus departs and turns the pulpit over to Mark Antony. And so repeatedly, Mark Antony starts by saying Brutus is an honorable man, right? And so then his speech goes on, and he becomes increasingly sarcastic. And in his sarcastic, he questions the claims that Brutus made in his speech that Caesar acted only out of ambition. So he was going on, and Antony points out that Caesar brought much wealth and glory to Rome, and 3 times he turned down the crown. And then Antony then proceeds with Caesar, but announces that he will not he will not read what Caesar said. So he brings out Caesar's will, and when he brings out his will, he said, well, I'm not going to read his will because you don't want to hear his will. Of course, the people are saying, read it. You know, they're all getting mad now because thinking how they really did love Julius Caesar. And so the crowd nevertheless begs him to read the will. So he descends from the pulpit and stands next to Caesar's body as he reads the will. And he describes Caesar's horrible death and shows Caesar's wounded body. And then he reads Caesar's will, which bequeaths his money. Caesar gave his money to every citizen and orders that his private gardens, all of his private gardens, be made to public, that he gave everything to them. So then they're like up in arms thinking, of course, Julius Caesar was for the people, and why did they kill him? And the crowd becomes enraged. This generous man lies dead, calling Brutus and Cassius now traitors, and the masses set off to drive them from the city. So, oh my goodness, this is how it's going. So you're watching this play. You have to watch the play. It gets kind of, intense now. Now what's going to happen? Now Mark Antony has turned the tide. Now in the midst of all this, you have faith. You have the soothsayer saying, oh, what's going to happen, and leading on. And then you have Brutus, and he is very convicted now, wondering if he really did the right thing. So, meanwhile, Caesar's adopted son and appointed successor, and his name is Octavius. Later on, he will become Augustus Caesar. So just what they thought. Now we will have a dictator taking over. But Octavius arrives in Rome and forms a 3-person coalition with Mark Antony and Lepidus. They prepare to fight. Now they're going to fight Cassius and Brutus, who have been driven into exile and are raising armies outside the city. At the conspirators' camp, Brutus and Cassius have a heated argument regarding matters of money and honor, but they ultimately reconcile. Brutus reveals that he is sick with grief. For his absence, his wife, Portia, is gone. She has killed herself. And then, so now he's thinking, now what else is going to happen? And we have the two of them get ready for battle. Now we have Cassius and Brutus fighting in the Senate, fighting against Antony and Octavius Caesar and Mark Antony. And that night, a ghost appears. Ghost appears to Brutus, announcing that Brutus will meet him again on the battlefield. So he's now having this dreams and these ghosts appearing to him that's telling them that it's Caesar's ghost. He thinks it's Caesar's ghost, and Caesar's ghost is telling them that he's going to appear, and that Brutus is ultimately going to die. This is getting kind of spooky, huh? So, let's finish up. We'll finish up here. Octavius and Antony, their armies march towards Brutus and Cassius, and Antony tells Octavius where to attack. But Octavius says he will make his own orders. So we know later on, Mark Antony and Octavius, they're going to end up being in a civil war later on too. So they're not united. And Octavius is just like a 16, 17, 18-year-old brat, of Julius Caesar's nephew. And thinking he's basically going to take over, which he will in the future. So here we have, but Octavius says that he will make his own orders. He is already asserting his authority as the heir of Caesar, and believing that he will be the next ruler, and he will take over not only the Senate, but take over Mark Antony too. The opposing generals meet on the battlefield and exchange insults. They start insulting each other before battle. So Cassius witnesses his own men start fleeing, and hears that Brutus's men are performing effectively, but Cassius sends in one of his men, Pandarius, to see how matters are progressing in the battle. And he thinks from afar, Pandarius sees one of the leaders, Cassius' best friend, Titinus, was being surrounded by troops, and concludes that he's been captured. Well, then Cassius believes, he despairs, and thinks, okay, this is the end. And so he has his swordmen kill him. So it's just really terrible, because now it was false, and yet let alone he was so afraid of being captured. And Brutus learns of the deaths of Cassius and Tintius with a heavy heart, and prepares to take on the Romans again. When the army loses, doom appears imminent, and Brutus asks one of his swordmen wanted him to kill him. And finally he believes that Caesar can rest satisfied. Brutus dies, and he dies for what he did. He felt like he died for what he did to Julius Caesar. And that's the end.